In a freezing laboratory shed in Paris at the turn of the 20th century, a woman spent 4 years stirring massive vats of radioactive material with an iron rod nearly as tall as herself, processing 8 tons of pitchblende residue to isolate a single gram of a previously unknown element, work so physically demanding and dangerous that it would ultimately kill her. Yet when the time came to recognize this monumental achievement, the scientific establishment tried to erase her name entirely from history. The Nobel Committee initially planned to award the 1903 Physics Prize solely to her husband and another male colleague, completely omitting the woman who had actually made the discovery, conducted the exhausting extraction work, and coined the very term radioactivity itself. This is the story of Marie Curie, a Polish immigrant who became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, but only after her husband threatened to refuse the award unless she was included, revealing the systematic erasure of women's contributions that defined scientific institutions for centuries. Born Maria Sklodowska in Warsaw, Poland, in 1867, she grew up under Russian occupation in a nation that denied women access to higher education. Her father was a mathematics and physics teacher who instilled in her a passion for scientific inquiry despite the oppressive political climate that sought to suppress Polish intellectual life. When her mother died of tuberculosis and her oldest sister succumbed to typhus, young Maria threw herself into her studies with fierce determination, graduating from gymnasium with top honors at age 15. The road ahead seemed impossibly blocked, as Polish women were forbidden from attending university and her family lacked the means to send her abroad for education. She made a pact with her sister Bronia. Maria would work as a governess to fund Bronia's medical studies in Paris, then Bronia would support Maria's education once she became a physician. For 6 years, Maria worked in relative isolation, teaching the children of wealthy families while conducting her own experiments in chemistry during stolen moments of free time. She read every scientific text she could obtain, teaching herself advanced mathematics and physics concepts that most university students struggled to master even with professional instruction. In 1891, she finally saved enough money to move to Paris, enrolling at the Sorbonne where she lived in a 6th-floor garret so cold that water froze in her basin at night, surviving on bread, chocolate, and fruit while dedicating every waking hour to her studies. Her classmates whispered about the strange Polish woman who sat in the front row, took meticulous notes, and asked questions that challenged even the professors, but she graduated first in her physics degree and second in mathematics, achievements virtually unheard of for women in that era. In 1894, she met Pierre Curie, a respected physicist who ran a laboratory at the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry in Paris. Their connection was immediate and intellectual, founded on a shared passion for scientific discovery rather than conventional romantic notions. Pierre recognized in Maria, who would soon take the French name Marie, an intellect equal to his own, a rarity in an age when most educated men viewed women as intellectually inferior by nature. They married in 1895 in a simple civil ceremony, with Marie wearing a dark blue dress that she could later wear in the laboratory, and spent their honeymoon touring the French countryside on bicycles. The discovery that would change everything came in 1896 when Henry Becquerel observed that uranium salts emitted rays that could expose photographic plates even in darkness. Marie became fascinated by this mysterious radiation and chose it as the subject of her doctoral research, one of the first women in Europe to pursue a doctorate in physics. Working in an abandoned shed that had once been a dissection room, with a leaking roof and temperatures that dropped below freezing in winter, Marie began systematic studies of various mineral samples to determine which materials emitted these strange rays. She made her first crucial discovery using an electrometer that Pierre and his brother had invented. The intensity of radiation from uranium compounds was proportional only to the amount of uranium present, regardless of the compound's form or whether it was exposed to light, heat, or other conditions. This suggested that radiation was an atomic property, coming from within the atom itself, a revolutionary concept that challenged the prevailing belief that atoms were indivisible and inert. She then tested every element and compound she could obtain, discovering that thorium also emitted radiation. Most significantly, she found that pitchblende, a uranium ore, was far more radioactive than pure uranium alone, suggesting the presence of another, even more radioactive element. If you are moved by these stories of brilliant minds whose contributions were nearly erased by history, whose genius demanded recognition against overwhelming prejudice, consider subscribing to Hidden Minds and activating the notification bell to journey with us through more extraordinary tales of forgotten pioneers who changed our understanding of the universe. Pierre, recognizing the magnitude of Marie's discovery, abandoned his own research on crystals to join her investigation. Together they began the back-breaking work of processing tons of pitchblende residue, donated by the Austrian government from its mines in Joachimsthal. Marie did most of the physical labor, stirring massive boiling vats with her iron rod, transferring materials between containers, conducting thousands of crystallizations and precipitations. The work was so exhausting that even the strong laboratory assistants they occasionally hired for heavy lifting found it nearly unbearable, yet Marie persisted day after day, her hands becoming scarred and burned from constant exposure to radioactive materials. In July 1898, they announced the discovery of a new element they named polonium, after Marie's homeland Poland, still suffering under Russian domination. By December that same year, they announced an even more significant discovery: radium, an element millions of times more radioactive than uranium. Marie coined the term radioactivity to describe this phenomenon, a word that would enter every scientific language and become fundamental to 20th century physics. The actual isolation of pure radium chloride would take another 4 years of grueling work, during which Marie processed 8 tons of pitchblende residue to produce just 1 gram of radium salts, a feat of determination and physical endurance that remains staggering even by modern standards. Their breakthrough research attracted international attention, and in 1903, the ROYAL Swedish Academy of Sciences began considering nominations for the Nobel Prize in Physics. Henry Becquerel was nominated for his initial observation of uranium radiation, and Marie Curie was nominated along with him, but Marie's name was conspicuously absent. The Nobel Committee, composed entirely of men, simply could not conceive of a woman making fundamental contributions to physics. Some members viewed Marie as merely her husband's assistant. Despite the fact that the discovery was hers, the concept of radioactivity was hers, and the majority of the exhausting physical work had been hers alone. The injustice was revealed when Pierre learned of the nomination and immediately wrote to the committee challenging the exclusion. He made clear that the discoveries belonged primarily to Marie, that she had initiated the research, made the crucial theoretical insights, and conducted the overwhelming majority of the experimental work. He threatened to refuse the prize unless Marie was included, a radical stance in an era when women's intellectual contributions were routinely attributed to male colleagues or husbands. Pierre's intervention worked, and the Nobel Committee reluctantly amended the award to include Marie, though she remained relegated to third position after Becquerel and Pierre in the official announcement. Marie could not even attend the ceremony in Stockholm due to the demands of teaching and the care of her young daughter Irene. Pierre accepted on their behalf, giving a lecture that emphasized Marie's contributions, yet most contemporary accounts focused on him as the primary scientist, relegating Marie to footnotes despite her central role. The financial prize money of 70,000 Swedish krona, equivalent to roughly $1 million today, provided the Curies with the first financial security they had known, allowing them to hire assistants and improve their primitive laboratory conditions. Tragedy struck in April 1906 when Pierre was killed in a street accident, run over by a horse-drawn wagon during a rainstorm in Paris. Marie was devastated, losing not only her husband but her closest intellectual companion and the one person in the scientific establishment who had consistently advocated for recognition of her abilities. The University of Paris offered her Pierre's professorship, making her the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne in its 650-year history. She continued their research alone, finally isolating pure metallic radium in 1910, an achievement that definitively proved radium's existence as an element and ended any remaining skepticism. In 1911, Marie was awarded a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her discovery and isolation of radium and polonium. She became the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in two different sciences, a record that would stand alone until Linus Pauling achieved the same feat decades later. Yet even this triumph was marred by scandal and prejudice, as conservative elements in French society attacked her for an alleged affair with physicist Paul Langevin, a married man, the press viciously targeting her with xenophobic and misogynistic attacks that a male scientist would never have endured. During World War I, Marie developed mobile X-ray units, which she called Petite Curies, and personally drove them to the front lines to help surgeons locate bullets and shrapnel in wounded soldiers. She trained operators, handled radioactive materials without adequate protection, and tirelessly worked to save lives using the technology her discoveries had made possible. Her contributions to military medicine saved thousands of lives, yet she received little recognition at the time, as military authorities were uncomfortable acknowledging dependence on a woman's expertise. Marie spent her later years establishing the Radium Institute in Paris, training a new generation of researchers and continuing her investigations into radioactivity and its applications. She worked without regard for safety, handling highly radioactive materials with her bare hands, keeping test tubes of glowing radium compounds in her pockets, working in laboratories without adequate ventilation or protection. The cumulative radiation exposure took its inevitable toll, causing cataracts, chronic fatigue, and ultimately aplastic anemia, a failure of bone marrow to produce blood cells caused by radiation damage. On July 4, 1934, Marie Curie died in a sanatorium in the French Alps at age 66. Her personal papers and laboratory notebooks remain radioactive to this day, stored in lead-lined boxes, and researchers who wish to consult them must wear protective clothing and sign liability waivers. She was initially buried alongside Pierre in a cemetery in Sceaux, but in 1995, both were reinterred in the Pantheon in Paris, making Marie the first woman honored there on her own merits rather than as someone's wife. Marie Curie's legacy extends far beyond her scientific discoveries, monumental though they were. She demonstrated that genius knows no gender, that intellectual contributions must be judged on merit rather than the identity of their source, and that systematic discrimination can erase history itself unless challenged by those with courage to fight back. Her story reveals how many brilliant women throughout history likely made similar contributions only to have them attributed to male colleagues, erased by institutional prejudice, or simply forgotten because they did not fit the expected narrative of who could be a great scientist. Today, radiation therapy treats millions of cancer patients annually. Medical imaging relies on radioactive isotopes she helped discover, and our understanding of atomic structure rests on foundations she helped establish. The Curie remains a unit of radioactive measurement, her name forever embedded in the scientific vocabulary she helped create. Yet we must remember that her recognition came only through struggle, that even after winning 2 Nobel Prizes she faced skepticism and attacks that male scientists never endured, and that countless other women likely made similar contributions that history has completely forgotten. Marie Curie's determination to claim recognition for her work, supported by Pierre's willingness to threaten refusal of his own honor, opened doors for future generations of women scientists, but those doors remain only partially open even today. Her story challenges us to examine whose contributions we celebrate, whose work we attribute correctly, and how many brilliant minds we may be overlooking because they do not match our preconceptions about genius. Every time we benefit from radioactive medical treatments or nuclear technology, we owe a debt to the woman who died from exposure to the very phenomenon she discovered, who fought for recognition in a world determined to erase her, and who proved through sheer brilliance and determination that greatness cannot be confined by prejudice.